Okay, part one of two, part two of two, and we're on. Okay. Welcome everybody. Welcome to our next session of Storytelling Sundays. It is about Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, and this is part two of the talk about Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, actually. So we had a session last week with Violetta Zain. We welcome you, please, to take a look at it because we just started talking about his life and getting to a certain point. We're going to be continuing on Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl where we left off. And just a quick little piece, he is called the father of virtues, or the father of knowledge being a virtue. He is by far one of the most outstanding teachers, apologist, and brightest scholarly mind of the faith, at least for the first century of the faith. We'll see what history tells us later on when beautiful luminaries rise up. That being said, we have with us this week's presenter, Ms. Violetta Zain, and we have joining us actually here, Adib Musumian is on with us, so we can get some Arabic again, pronunciations, backdrop pieces, and Adib and Violetta are working on the same theme too, so this works out perfectly. On the same session.
We have Adib and I have spent the week concocting a very special surprise for you guys.
Oh boy!
Dun, dun, dun.
Well, just real quick for everybody, you can find publications, chronologies, items that Violetta and Adiba worked on actually online at www.theutteranceproject.com, or you could go to the YouTube channel for the Utterance Project, and you can find the original Persian and Arabic of Bahá'u'lláh, the Bab, and Abdu'l-Bahá set to voice, where it's read out loud, and you can see it with English subtitles and transliteration. So with that being said, please look at the first session. You can just dive in right here too, but we have another session that's part one. This is part two of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. With that being said, Violetta, welcome.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. So let me share my screen. I have some surprises for you today. Is everything displaying correctly?
So far, so good. We have the Father of Knowledge on the screen, part two.
Oh, wonderful. So last week, we were together and we looked at the early part of Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's life. So we looked at his studies and his childhood, his extraordinary conversion to the faith, and his early travels in Iran and in Central Asia, in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. Then he spent 10 months with Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land, in Akká, in 1894. And that is a turning point in his life that we're going to see very clearly in this part. Abdu'l-Bahá, it's almost as if he recreated Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So it's just extraordinary. And we're going to be looking at how he set him in motion in Egypt, in France, in the United States, then in Egypt again. And then we're going to look at his legacy and his passing. Last week, we opened the session with a prayer revealed for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl by Bahá'u'lláh. And that was one of two prayers. This is the second prayer, which my dear collaborator, Adib Musumian, sent me, and he has agreed to read it for us. And we're going to open today with this prayer.
Praise be to thee, O Lord my God, for guiding me unto the horizon of thy revelation, and for causing me to be mentioned by thy name. I beseech thee, by the spreading rays of the day star of thy providence, and by the billowing waves of the ocean of thy mercy, to grant that my speech may bear a trace of the influence of thine own exalted word, attracting thereby the realities of all created things. Powerful art thou to do what thou willest through thy wondrous and incomparable utterance.
Thank you. So, part 7, 1895 to 1900, Cairo. At the turn of the century, Egypt was the hub of Muslim civilization. Its Al-Azhar University was the #1 institution of higher learning in the entire Muslim world. The university encapsulated centuries of traditions of religious scholarship, and it was animated by a spirit of reform and modernism. And Abdu'l-Bahá chose Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl above all other believers to inject the relevance of the Baha'i faith in that academic atmosphere. Before he left Akká, Abdu'l-Bahá had advised Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl to use the indirect approach of teaching and to first earn the respect of his peers and his students before beginning to bring up the Baha'i teachings. His 10 months in Akká in 1894 would really forever change Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's approach to and his success in teaching the faith. We are going to have several opportunities throughout today's presentation to cast a light on exactly what made him so effective. So when Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl arrived in Cairo in Egypt in July 1895, he followed his usual habit, which we'd seen in part 1 of this talk, which is to just arrive into a city and just find his own accommodations. And that's what he did. And he immediately began going to the University of Al-Azhar. In very short order, he began to gather around him around him people who were really interested in him. He was accepted into academic circles. And it was really mainly due to his remarkable intellect and his brilliant grasp of comparative religious history that made him stand out. So he was particularly admired for his very original turn of mind in interpretation of religious scriptures, more specifically. And soon he had a very avid following of Al-Azhar students and other devotees who gradually were introduced to the faith. 30 of these became Baha'is. And Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl also made friends with a number of writers and magazine publishers. And during his stay in Cairo, there were articles written about him, and he also published articles himself. And in Egypt, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl wasn't known as Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. He was more known as Sheikh Fazlullah Irani, which is kind of the Egyptian version, I guess, or Jurfad Khani, the Arabic form of Gulpaygan, the village he was from in Persia. It's kind of difficult to underestimate how much Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was respected during this time of his life. And he traveled in these very respected academic circles. People referred to him as, this is a quote, God of the pen, a pillar of history, and the cornerstone of knowledge and virtue. Both knowledge and virtue show up in this. So it's very interesting. I mean, it was pretty obvious to everyone that he was a superior intellect and perception, spiritual perception. So in Cairo, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl became a magnet of Baha'i intellectual activity. So from Persia and from India, from Turkestan, from the Caucasus, from Central Asia, from Syria, from the Holy Land, and Burma and China, Baha'is corresponded with Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. Many of them referred to him by Abdu'l-Bahá for the questions they were asking. And also he received objections and attacks to the faith for his response and defense. Until Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl set foot in Egypt, all the Baha'is in Egypt were Persian. And so about 30 learned Egyptians became Baha'is thanks to him. And these are just 4 of the most well-known Egyptian Baha'is during his time: Sheikh Abdul Jalil Bey Saad, Sheikh Badruddin Al-Ghazi, Sheikh Muhiduddin Kurdi, and Sheikh Farajullah Kurdi. And I have a story about Sheikh Badruddin Al-Ghazi next. So Sheikh Badruddin Al-Ghazi was just enraptured with Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's discourses. And he thought that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was the chosen one of God. He had a spiritual station far above all other human beings. And Sheikh Badruddin Al-Ghazi asked Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl about his station. And Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl said, I don't have a station. And he spoke plainly to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. He said, oh, master, why do you hide from me? If you're a chosen one of God and you have a station, please tell me. I will accept it. I will follow you. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl laughed at the statement, didn't give an answer. At some point after this conversation, Sheikh Baruddin al-Ghazi was traveling to Palestine, and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl asked him to try and attain the presence of Abdu'l-Bahá while he was in Akká. So Sheikh Baruddin al-Ghazi, obedient to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, did it, and his eyes were opened. And years later, when Sheikh Baruddin al-Ghazi met Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl again, he told him, when in the past I came in contact with you, I considered you to be the unique person, one without a peer in this world. But when I attained the holy presence of the Master, I realized that you are no more than a drop in relation to that billowing ocean. His words made Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl so happy, so filled with joy and ecstasy, that he threw his arms around Sheikh Baruddin and said, now I know that you have recognized the truth. All this was fine until around 1896. On the 1st of May, 1896, Nasruddin Shah was assassinated in Tehran. And one of the enemies of the Baha'is in Egypt, Zaimud Dawli, spread a fabricated false rumor that the Shah had been assassinated by Baha'is. He wanted to basically instigate a massacre on Baha'is. So the tension rose to a climax one day at the Iranian embassy in Cairo. And Zaimud Dawli began accusing the Baha'is, and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl immediately leapt to the defense of the believers. And he asserted they could never have murdered the Shah. And when he was pressed, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl admitted that he himself was a Baha'i. And that is when his religion became public knowledge in Egypt. So after the scandal of the assassination, two of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's books were published. One was Faraid, the Peerless Gems, his masterpiece, and the defense of the Kitabi Aqdas against someone who was attacking it. And then the other one was Al-Durarul Bahiyye, the Shining Pearls, a collection of essays on the history of religion written by him in Arabic. And after their publication, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's phase of indirect teaching basically came to an abrupt stop, because you can't teach indirectly if everyone knows you're a Baha'i. He became known as the most learned exponent of the faith of Bahá'u'lláh in Egypt. And the ulama and the scholars of the Al-Azhar University became very agitated and decided that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl should be declared an infidel. This was around the time that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl left Egypt to go see Abdu'l-Bahá in Akká. And so now here you have on the slide here, you have the first image is the cover of Faraid, the Peerless Gems, and the second one is the cover of Al-Durarul Bahiyye, the Shining Pearls. So before moving on to the next part of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's life, we have to do something a little bit unpleasant, and we have to look at who Kheiralláh was and why Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl had to go to France and the United States. So I didn't want to give too much emphasis to Kheiralláh, so I just obscured his picture as much as I can, but that's his profile right there. Ibrahim Kheiralláh was a very charismatic Lebanese jack of all trades. He was an aficionado of black magic. He was a gadget inventor. He'd invented these springs that soldiers can put in the heels of their shoes to make walking long distances less tiring. Never really took off, but he discovered the faith in 1889 while he was living in Cairo. So years before Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl went there. And he fell in love with Bahá'u'lláh and the teachings of Bahá'u'lláh. He traveled to the United States in 1892 and settled in Chicago. He began practicing healing with the laying on of hands and smoking medicinal herbs through a water pipe and the recitation of Bible passages for $2 a session. To bolster his reputation, he bought a diploma of medicine from a diploma mill in Chicago, and he became known as Dr. Ibrahim Kheiralláh and called himself a physician. He did have a bachelor's in science, I think, but he's never actually a doctor. So everybody calls him doctor, but he wasn't a doctor. Kheiralláh arrived in America. He was convinced of the truth of Baha'u'llah's mission, but he didn't have a single book with him or a pamphlet. And it just so happens that he was an extremely enthusiastic, very effective, very systematic teacher of the cause. He was a self-styled, and I found this in a newspaper article actually, he called himself the high priest of truth knowers. And he enrolled hundreds of Americans who he called truth seekers into a hodgepodge, psychedelic hybrid, Rosicrucian Christian secret society, sort of a reinvented Baha'i faith, kind of, not the original Baha'i faith. There were a lot of other stuff in what he was teaching. And actually, this is really incredible. Among his converts are some of the most celebrated names in Baha'i history. Phoebe Hearst was one of his converts, and she organized the first pilgrimage of Westerners to the Holy Land to meet Abdu'l-Bahá in person in 1898. But he brought into the faith 11 of the 19 disciples of Abdu'l-Bahá: Thornton Chase, the first American Baha'i, Lua Getzinger, Arthur P. Dodge, Howard McNutt, Isabella Brittingham, Lillian Capps, Helen Goodall, Chester Thatcher, Charles Greenleaf, William Hoare, and Paul K. Deely, the very first Canadian from New Brunswick to enter the Baha'i faith. So now, with all of this huge success, Ibrahim Kheiralláh had a very inflated ego. And he devised what he thought was a brilliant plan, but is actually quite a preposterous idea, to divide the Baha'i world in two geographically. He would administer the West, and Abdu'l-Bahá would administer the rest of the world. It's a very massive blow to his pride when Abdu'l-Bahá, when he realized during his pilgrimage that Abdu'l-Bahá was not going to divide the world in two for him. But that was not what made him a covenant breaker. What made him a covenant breaker was the last straw. He had written a book on Bahá'u'lláh where he peddled very wrong ideas. I mean, he talked about the Ba being the reincarnation of Elijah. He talked about Abdu'l-Bahá, Badiullah, and Mirza Muhammad Ali to be exactly on the same station. So when Abdu'l-Bahá asked him not to publish it, and he actually published it, this book filled with dangerous, outrageous inaccuracies against Abdu'l-Bahá's specific instructions, Abdu'l-Bahá was then forced to name him a covenant breaker. And the rift between them was so serious that it actually made the papers in the United States. So the American Baha'i community was quite split, and they were very confused because they loved Kheiralláh. He was so charismatic, but they loved Abdu'l-Bahá, and it was a very difficult situation. And it was such a serious situation that Abdu'l-Bahá needed someone loyal, steadfast, firm, immensely knowledgeable, and immensely humble, immensely deepened, like Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So now part 9, Akká and Lebanon. So in July 1900, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl visited Akká once again, and Abdu'l-Bahá had already sent several Persian teachers to America and to France and to Paris, and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was the last one. He was the last teacher specifically sent for this strengthening the covenant and deepening the believers and clearing their confusion. And during this trip, Abdu'l-Bahá told Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, you go to Paris, but you're also going to go to the United States. So he gave him several, there were several aims that Abdu'l-Bahá had for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. One was that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl had to find a way to stop Kheirallah's attempts at dividing the American Baha'is, because he was actively doing that. The second one was that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was mandated to correct Ibrahim Kheirallah's misrepresentations of the Baha'i teachings that he'd been peddling for 8 years. So part 10, we start seeing Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl travel. And so part 10 is Paris. Abdu'l-Bahá's eyes were fixed on Paris. He wanted above all to protect the community from the taint of covenant breaking and the confusion that would come in its wake, and basically to prevent Paris from becoming as confused and as divided as the American Baha'i community had become. So it was almost like a preventionary measure. And he wanted Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl to do 3 things. 1, to enlighten the Baha'is about the Baha'i faith. 2, of course, to counteract the disunity that was spread by Kheiralláh. But 3 is interesting. Abdu'l-Bahá wanted Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl to assist May Maxwell in deepening the new believers who were largely ignorant or misinformed about Baha'i principles and history. And that's really important because it's a very modern idea to train someone so that there's something left after you leave. And that is exactly what Abdu'l-Bahā's idea was, because May Maxwell was going to stay. And then people like Thomas Breakwell and Hippolyte Dreyfus were going to become Baha'is after Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl left. And that was thanks to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl deepening her. She never forgot his lessons, and she talked for her whole life about the impact he'd had on her. Laura Clifford Barney, on the left, traveled from Paris to Egypt in the spring of 1901 to bring Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl back to Paris. And he arrived in Paris with Anton Haddad and Ali Khuli Khan, who both translated for him during his travels in the West, and Lua Getzinger. So they arrived kind of a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 or 5. For the first month in Paris, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl taught the Baha'i teachings daily through translations of Anton Haddad and Ali Khuli Khan. Agnes Alexander was in Paris at the time. She would later go on to remarkable exploits in Eastern Asia, specifically Japan and Hawaii. And she remembered those blessed days. This is what Agnes Alexander had to say about Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. An atmosphere of pure light pervaded the Paris meetings, so much so that one was transported, as it were, from the world of man to that of God. Juliet Thompson also met Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, and she deeply loved him, and she called him our great teacher, so heavenly wise, and she spoke of those days as days of miracle, all but incredible confirmations. Now, if I remember correctly, Juliet Thompson wasn't able to stay for 3 months in Paris with Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. She went to London, but she wrote to May Maxwell constantly about Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl from London. Now, this is what I was promising you at the beginning. I have 2 or 3 moments in this presentation where I'm going to explain to you how Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl became incredibly effective after his 10 months with Abdu'l-Bahá in 1894. And this is one of the very important points of the talk, is that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl had a special gift for creating and fostering unity around him wherever he went. As you read the histories written about his stays in various places, you realize that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl not only created the conditions for unity, so he prepared the ground, but he also planted the seed and he watered the plant. He didn't just exist, he altered the environment he was in a conscious way, in a very humble and a very conscious way. So I read so many different testimonies of this particular aspect of his ability to foster unity, and I compiled them using my own words from all these different historians and witnesses. And this is so my attempt to paint a pen portrait of how Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl created unity, and a pen portrait of his character in a way. So the following words are mine, but they're inspired by the histories that I read. So his impact on fledgling Baha'i communities was very profound, but it was also due to his particularly special character, which was a really delightful combination of a sweet and unassuming personality, but an oceanic and authoritative knowledge. That mixture is very important. And it was combined with this ingredient, a wonderful sense of humor, this unanimous about him, and a deep humility, which sweetened all the gatherings that he was in. So it is possible for a person's character to reflect so much humility that it gives a flavor, a sweetness to the gatherings they are in, which is an incredible concept. And this is my father found this story for me. I didn't actually find this when I was doing my research, but while Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was living in Paris, May Bowles, had an incredible experience. She saw a disabled boy on a crutch holding a pussy willow. Pussy willow is that plant that you see on the screen. It's very beautiful. It comes in the spring, which is when Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was in Paris. So May stood and gazed at this little boy who was on crutches And the boy lifted his eyes to hers. And this is what May said about this experience. Our souls seemed to meet in mutual love and understanding in that moment of beauty. I told my great and learned teacher, whom the master sent to me, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, of this slight but touching incident. And he said, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl said, listen to this. This changed my life. Out of such moments, light is born. And he goes on, out of that momentary contact of the spirit would unfold in the worlds beyond a whole life of meaning and purpose. The traces appear on this earth, but the fruition is beyond. The seed of a loving deed, a warm and tender contact, a word of love and hope, a little service, a small sacrifice are but the traces here, which like the seed will grow to mighty trees and bear imperishable fruits hereafter. Then how much more such lives as yours, spent in the service of the cause, dedicated to him, establishing an eternal foundation for this world, whose superstructure shall appear in shining minarets and gems under the light of the eternal sun. And Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl said this about a glance. Oof, that was very intense. So Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl spent 3 months in Paris when it was the most important Baha'i community in all of Europe, actually. And when many eminent Baha'is embraced the cause. During his visit, more than 30 people became Baha'is, which is interesting because when he was at Al-Azhar University, 30 people became Baha'is too. I think that's really interesting. Part 11, the United States. Abu'l-Faḍl comes to America. But before he goes to America, look at the love of Abdu'l-Bahá. One of the fascinating aspects of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's trip to America was that he was really, his main translator was Ali Khuli Khan. And Ali Khuli Khan was told by Abdu'l-Bahá to stay in Akká for months and months, and he trained him and prepared him for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. Did you ever think Abdu'l-Bahá would have time to do something like that? One day, while he was in Akká, and I put the picture of the house of Abud because that is where Abdu'l-Bahá was living at the time. So one day Abdu'l-Bahá told the young Ali Khuli Khan, who is pictured here, very handsome, dressed in Western dress, with Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, dressed in Eastern dress, both holding canes. And this picture, my friends, you will not find this on the internet because this picture was sent to me by the United States National Baha'i Archives. I have 5 pictures that I've never seen before of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, and they gave me permission to use them in my talk. And this is one of them. It's very beautiful, very high quality. So Abdu'l-Bahá told the young Ali Khuli Khan, who was looked exactly the way he looks now, because this was just a few months before his trip. So you can just imagine this young man and Abdu'l-Bahá speaking to him, saying, during all these long months you have worked for me, I have been preparing you, and now you are sufficiently prepared. The time has now come for you to leave me and to go to America with Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. There in America, this is a prophecy, my friends. There in America, he will write a book called the Baha'i Proofs, and you are to translate that book. In addition, you are to translate his oral and written teachings and his lectures to the many groups in the United States which are eager to hear him. Friends, I don't think Abdu'l-Bahá ever said this about anyone else. This man is going to write a book, it's going to have this title. I don't even think that the time that he said this to Ali Khuli Khan, I'm not sure if Abu'l-Faḍl even knew he was going to write that book. The story of that book comes later. You'll hear all about it. But in addition to basically ordering Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl to write a book, which Abdu'l-Bahá had done before in his life, he tells this young man, you're going to translate it, and you're also going to take notes of everything he says, his speeches, his writings, his lectures. That is a red flag for us to pay close attention to every single aspect of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's life. For Abdu'l-Bahá to show so much respect for the emanations of his mind, I think is everything. I think that maybe I didn't need to do these 2 talks. Just needed to read that sentence. That would have been enough. This is just a picture that I found of early Baha'is of Chicago in 1900. So this is my image for, these are the people that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl talked to. I mean, I don't know for sure. I don't know who they are, but these are the early Baha'is of Chicago in 1900. And Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl arrived in 1901. So after 3 months in Paris, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl arrived in the United States in the early fall for our American friends, 1901. He was going to spend 3 years in America. 3 years. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl didn't stay in New York at all. He went directly to Chicago, which was where the largest Baha'i community was, which was where Ibrahim Kheiralláh was. His arrival in Chicago caused a stir among Baha'is and among the general public, you know, the kind of stir that Abdu'l-Bahá would cause 11 years later, because people weren't used to seeing these Easterners in Eastern garb, you know. So the press gave detailed accounts of his background, his great learning, his imprisonments in Tehran, his high standing among the intellectuals of Cairo, Egypt, Al-Azhar University. And Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl had this urgency to lecture the American Baha'is feverishly on Baha'i history. And he often went to the Bible. You know, he was very famous in Egypt for knowing all the different holy books. And so when he came in America, this really was so important. He knew the Bible inside and out. And so he would go straight to Bible verses and Bible passages and Bible prophecies. And that would help the American Baha'is better understand, better appreciate the religion they came from. And the problem was that Kheiralláh had wormed his way into the psyche of the Baha'i community and the American Baha'is. They had become so used to Kheirallah's entertainment style teaching with abstract mystical talks and secrets that you graduate from, and only certain people graduate and not everybody knows everything. And so he also interpreted their dreams, which everyone loves, right? And of course, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl would never do that. So at first they found him, it was too cold and unemotional for them because they were used to the sort of entertainment quality of presentation of the Baha'i proofs, of the Baha'i faith, really. Now this is a photograph I found online, and it's Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl standing with Americans, but I don't know where. I don't know if it's in Green Acre. I don't know if it's in Chicago. There was no information on the photograph. But anyway, that's just an image of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl in America. So over time during his stay in Chicago, more and more American Baha'is began to slowly appreciate what it was exactly that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was doing. He was giving clear and authoritative presentations on the faith and on its principles. He was helping them understand their childhood Christianity better. He spent 3 months in Chicago, and he gave daily classes, weekly lectures, and answered questions from the audience, as well as questions sent in by mail. In Chicago, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl received visits from leading intellectuals and from Catholics and from Protestants, and everyone left his meeting impressed with him and his beautiful manners. They were impressed with his beautiful manners. When Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl encountered hostile religious leaders who tried to goad him into arguments or win arguments, he would ensnare them in his implacable logic. So that's another thing that's very interesting about Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. We get another clue here about his character, is that yes, He has an oceanic knowledge. Yes, he has a great sense of humor. Yes, he has beautiful manners. But he has an extremely sharp and quick mind. And he is like a prosecutor or a DA that is so brilliant that any kind of thing you throw at them, they never lose their ground. They never lose their calm. There's always an argument spoken in a soft voice. But, you know, it's hard to combine such a softness of sweetness, of a sense of humor and a humility and just so kind. But at the same time, this mind that could not be tricked by anybody, by anyone, no matter what language they were speaking. Now, one of the most special things that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl brought to both Paris and America was actually, he was the first real carrier of genuine Baha'i culture. He was born the year that the Bab declared his mission. He was born in 1844. He became a Baha'i in 1876. He received tablets from Bahá'u'lláh until Bahá'u'lláh died, who was guiding him to go teach right and left. He was in prison on and off for 10 years. And then Abdu'l-Bahá guided him constantly until the end of his life. And so this is the person who traveled to Paris and America, imbibed with real Baha'i culture. And like Haji Mirza Haidar Ali, who was imprisoned in South Sudan, he had suffered for the cause. I'm not saying that suffering is wonderful. I'm just saying that the kind of faith that's unshakable that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl and Haji Mirza Haidar Ali and Badi and all those people who were tortured and imprisoned had, that is something that is indigenous to the heroic age of the faith. And you have one of those heroes now walking in your midst and teaching you things. And I think that that's just an incredible clue on why Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was so effective, really. He embodied Baha'i history, basically. I mean, he was loved and encouraged and guided and written to by Bahá'u'lláh, the founder of the Baha'i faith, and the center of the covenant, Abdu'l-Bahá. So Thornton Chase gave his thoughts about Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's trip, and he said, with these teachers, he was talking about the teachers that came before, but he was really specifically talking also about Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. With these teachers came the first opportunity for a correct and intimate knowledge of the true Baha'i teachings. Now, here you see the mind of Thornton Chase. You know, we don't know enough about Thornton Chase. It's such a brilliant, concise distilling of what Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl did. I am so sorry. My throat is very, very dry. I'm going to cut my video for just a minute. Adib, I'm so sorry to call on you. We hadn't planned this, but I have to just get a glass of water. Would you mind reading the quote on screen while I go get my glass of water?
I'll be very happy to do that. Yes.
Okay, great. So Thornton Chase, before you do, I just want to say that Thornton Chase explained that many Baha'is left the faith when they were confronted with Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's sane and practical teachings that were focused on righteousness and right living. So now I'm going to cut my video, and then Thornton Chase adds,
those who remained discovered such spiritual light, guidance, richness, and power in the teachings that they were deeply confirmed in their belief and clung to it as the most valuable instruction for man to obtain. The classes and assemblies which had diminished in number again began to grow.
Hi, thank you so much. Give me 1 minute. So it's from Mae Maxwell that I think, I mean, unless there is another one that I haven't seen, but Mae Maxwell's description of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's spiritual strategy nearly everywhere he went, really. Paris, New York, Chicago, Greenacre, Washington, D.C. She analyzed it and she talked about it. He had laid down divine principles of teachings in May Maxwell's heart, and he'd really, in her own words, really transformed her understanding and her attitude to teaching. And he showed May Maxwell that it was the Spirit of God which was accomplishing the work, and that the Baha'i teacher had to wait on the Spirit and do its bidding. Do you see now his great humility? He would never take credit for anything he was doing. He would always say that it was the conquest on high that's doing this. I'm just the instrument, you know. That's the secret of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So this is how May Maxwell describes his method of teaching the faith, which Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl taught her. Sorry. We must first touch the heart to awaken it. If it opens and responds, we must sow the priceless seed. Prepare the soil with the warmth of your love, just as the sun prepares the soil in the spring, or the seed will not grow. Remove the stones and weeds. That is to say, in a kind way, try to remove prejudices. Uproot narrow superstitions by suggesting broader, deeper ideas. Never oppose people's ideas and statements, but give them a little nobler way of seeing life. Thus, such words and thoughts will take effect because they come from a Baha'i whose life flows from the source of all life on earth today. Now, honestly, I can't explain to you how excited I was when I found this. This is a newspaper article with Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl on the front page, I think. Allahu Abha, says Mirza to Washington. I love this. I love this. This is one of the favorite things I found. I love it. So it has a picture of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl in the grass with Ali Khuli Khan or in Ahmed Sohrab or Anton Haddad, one of those three people. Then in the middle, of course, for I don't know which reason, they have the Temple of Ishqabad, which was being built. And then, of course, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, the famous picture of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So in December 1901, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl arrived in Washington, D.C. and ostensibly said Allah Abha to Washington. I don't know. I hope so. And continued to give his distinctive talks to Baha'is and seekers. And one of the many features that made Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's stay in America so successful were his interpretations of the Bible. They were wonderful. From Genesis to Revelation, he gave explicit, lengthy interpretations of miracles, like the fish and the loaves, and explained them in a way people had never heard. Fanny Knobloch, we'll see her later when he goes back to Egypt, but remember her name. Fanny Knobloch attended his talks for 2 years, and she explained her attractions to his teachings. Yet here came one brought up in the Mohammedan faith and revealed this jewel of wisdom concealed in the parable of our New Testament. It touched them even more because he was born Muslim and they were born Christian, but he knew more. And he had much more extraordinary, wonderful, deep, convincing, satisfying explanations for these parables. So in addition of giving talks, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl steadily worked on writing the book that Abdu'l-Bahá said he was going to write. Is the brilliant proof. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl neglected himself deeply during his journey to America. He wasn't eating properly. He was killing himself at work, talking constantly, answering letters, writing the book. And out of concern for his well-being, and at the suggestion of his young translator, Ali Khuli Khan, Abdu'l-Bahá, so he was probably secretly writing to Abdu'l-Bahá saying, oh, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl isn't eating, he's not drinking, he's just smoking, drinking tea, writing, teaching, he's not doing anything else, he's not sleeping. So that's probably what happened, you know? Of course, it would have all been in Persian. Abdu'l-Bahá was always really, for the life of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, you know, they were born the same year, huh? Abdu'l-Bahá and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl were exactly the same age. Exactly. They were born in 1844, both of them. But Abdu'l-Bahá was always taking care of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, like just making sure he had what he needed. He was healthy, make sure people were around him. People went to see him, check on him, that he slept once in a while. And so he sent Ahmad Sohrab to Egypt, to America from Egypt, to serve as Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's personal attendant, which I guarantee you, knowing what I know about Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl now, he would not have liked. In July and August of 1903, Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl traveled to Greenacre, the Baha'i school in Maine, which is now an amazing historical Baha'i institution that's part of American Baha'i history. But at the time, people just gathered there before it became a holy Baha'i institution, and he went there from July to August 1903. So he'd been in the United States for 2 years now. And this is a wonderful picture from the United States Baha'i Archives. Thank you. Thank you to the archives. Of Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl sitting on a porch with an American boy, and then I'm not sure exactly who's in the picture, but I forgot to write it down. I'm sorry.
I can chime in on that if you want.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Sure. Because you were kind enough, Violetta, also to send me this photograph, and I remember on the reverse side their names are written. So sitting to the left of Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl, he's the leftmost man. I think his first name was Muhammad, Professor Muhammad Barakatullah. He was an Indian man he was associated with the faith for a time. He showed interest in it. I think in early volumes of Star of the West, you'll also find mentions of his name. But later he distances himself from it, goes really into being like an Indian revolutionary and whatnot. He has a Wikipedia article. You can find more about him from there. And then to Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's right, as you mentioned, there's an unidentified American boy. To his right is Ali Ghori Khan, and to his right is Ahmad Sohrab.
There you go, his personal attendant. Okay, so this is Greenacre today. I just could not resist. It's so gorgeous. Oh my God. And it's the spring, so it's not the right season because you went there in the summer, but it's okay. So, Adiba, this is Ahmad Sohrab on the left and Ali Ghori Khan on the right.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Yes. And this is also, this is the third or fourth picture from the archives. So at Greenacre, everyone was talking about nirvana and spiritualism. And people and professors of philosophy from Harvard would come, and Columbia, University of New York, and they would mingle with artists and men and women of influence and affluence, businesswomen, spiritualists. And it was the figure of Ali Ghori Khan, this highly disciplined, almost ascetic man that towered over everyone with his distinctive cane. Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's depth of knowledge, the rigor of his intellect, the range of his awareness, and the currents of philosophical and scientific thought in the West, which he mastered, the originality of his approach to teaching religion, to explaining traditional subjects, and all of these things mixed together in such I cannot emphasize this enough, everyone fell in love with Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl. They completely fell in love with him because of his character. He was sweet, he was funny, he was humble, he was impeccably well-mannered. Yeah, everyone fell in love with him. Now, while he was in Greenacre, it's very interesting, he wrote an article called Knowing God Through Love, which you see here was published along with his farewell address to the American believers in later that year. So obviously he returned to Greenacre in the summer of 1904 and gave this talk called Knowing God Through Love. And he deconstructs love into its smallest components, its major types, its prerequisites, its effect, its necessity, and all. It's an incredible talk. And after spending a little more than 3 years in the United States, Abdu'l-Bahá sent word to Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl that it was time to return to the Middle East. Now, this picture is my favorite picture that the Baha'i Archive sent me. Have you ever seen online, Google Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl and Lua Getzinger? You're going to see a picture of Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl alone with Lua Getzinger. That picture was never taken. It was modified from this original. They photoshopped everybody out and darkened everybody and just had Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl and Lua Getzinger as if the portrait was taken of them too. That was never a real photo. This is the real photo. Do you see the people on the boat here? I had a little exchange with the archives office and I asked them, was this his arrival or his departure? And now I believe that it was his departure, because if it was, first of all, I don't think that there's more poise when you leave on a steamer than when you arrive. When you arrive, everybody's taking their luggage off. So there would not have been time to pose right in front of the boat. But the archive suggested that I word it by saying likely taken upon his departure, but not saying definitely this is his departure. But secretly, I think it was his departure, but it's likely taken upon his departure. So Abdu'l-Bahá sent word to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl about 3 years later, it's time to come back to the Middle East. So Baha'is from throughout the United States organized this immense farewell party on the 29th of November, 1904. And he gave a wonderful address in there that was published with Knowing God Through Love. And in a real sense, it was Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl who prepared the ground for Abdu'l-Bahā's visit to America 8 years hence. Can you imagine? He was like the gardener, and for 3 years, he prepared the soil. And then Abdu'l-Bahá came and he planted those seeds. But of course, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl planted seeds too. But I mean, he prepared Chicago, New York, Greenacre, Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., and Greenacre. And Abdu'l-Bahá, guess what? Spent a lot of his time in Chicago, Greenacre, New York, and Washington. So the farewell address on the 29th of November, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl made an exceedingly rare reference to his own life. This is almost the only place I've been able to find. I don't think there's anywhere else where Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl talks about his childhood. But it's really interesting when you listen to it, see how humble he does it and how wonderfully he turns around talking about himself into talking about God. So this is what he said at his farewell address. I mean, it's a very long address. This is one of the things he said. I think at the beginning, actually, about 32 years ago, I was on the point of departure from my birthplace, the city of Gulpaygam, to Tehran. Though I was the son of a prominent Mohammedan divine of the place, the only ones who came to visit me and bid me farewell were my own mother, sisters, and brothers. At that time, I was not a believer in this great cause. 3 years subsequent to my arrival in Tehran, I was blessed with this faith in a wonderful revelation. As a consequence of my acceptance of this truth, which was contrary to the religious opinion of my relatives, my mother, brothers, and sister entirely abandoned me, and I was left alone with no sympathy on the part of kith or kin. Now consider how our Lord blessed me with 100-fold more than I sacrificed for his sake. So literally the only recorded place where Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl talks about himself, he's not talking about himself. He's talking about God, what God has given him. That's humility. That's the kind of humility you maybe encounter a few times in a lifetime. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about part 12, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's last years. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl spent his last years living in Cairo, with occasional stays in Beirut and visits to Haifa, where Abdu'l-Bahá was now living. After a 9-day pilgrimage with Abdu'l-Bahá and Akká in November of 1908, Fanny Knobloch, remember her from Washington, D.C.? She's back again. She and her sister Alma Knobloch and their friend Ida Finch from Seattle traveled to Cairo, Egypt once more to see their beloved teacher from America, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. When they were leaving, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl gave Fanny Knobloch his most precious possession, his prayer beads, saying to her, "My Lord gave them to me." During one of his trips to Akká after his return from his trip to the United States, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was seated in Akká with a number of American pilgrims in the presence of Abdu'l-Bahá. So these are some American pilgrims in 1909, which is around the time this story takes place. They were not present at the dinner here or the luncheon or the whatever the occasion. I just want to give you an image of what they would have looked like. The women with their big hats, and the men, and just a mixture of people. So during this gathering where the Western pilgrims were, the American pilgrims were with Abdu'l-Bahá and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, they began to praise Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl for the help he'd given them, saying that he taught so many souls, he defended the cause so efficiently against his adversaries, he'd helped build a strong, healthy, deepened Baha'i community in America. And the more they lavished praises on Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, the more he became increasingly sad, increasingly depressed, until finally Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl burst into tears and wept loudly. The American believers had absolutely no idea what just happened. They just couldn't understand his reaction. They thought they hadn't praised him enough, so they praised him more. And Abdu'l-Bahá explained to them, that by praising him, they had hurt him. Abdu'l-Bahá explained to these American pilgrims, this is the difference between the Eastern Baha'is and the Western Baha'is at that time in the faith. Look at the perspective of the Eastern Baha'is embodied by Abdu'l-Bahá. He says, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl considered himself as utter nothingness. And by praising him, they had hurt him. And so now in 1907, Thornton Chase, the first American Baha'i, insists on going to Cairo to visit his old friend. He was a disciple of Abdu'l-Bahá. He'd become a Baha'i because of Kheiralláh, but he had attended Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's class, who strengthened him and transformed him and steeled him for service and just enkindled him. And he visited, this is a picture with him and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl is right here. And this is Thornton Chase. And is he wearing a fez? I can't tell. On the 27th of June, 1907, Thornton Chase sent 4 packages of books to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl and enclosed a letter saying that he had loved his visit to Cairo. This is probably the most famous vignette on Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, but I had to include it, is Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl and smoking. So a striking feature of Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's figure that he cut was that he was a chain smoker. He had chain smoked for 55 years. He rolled his own cigarettes, and from morning, early dawn to late in the middle of the night, he would light one cigarette with the other and just smoke all day long in America and France and Cairo, everywhere. And another striking feature, like the most striking feature of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, is that he had just a radiant acquiescence to anything Bahá'u'lláh or Abdu'l-Bahá ever told him. And so that's really what we want to keep in mind in this story. It's a very beautiful story. So at some point, we don't exactly know which year, a Baha'i named Hussein Ruhi Effendi came back from Akká with a copy of a tablet that Abdu'l-Bahá had revealed called the Tablet of Purity. And in the Tablet of Purity, Abdu'l-Bahá speaks about smoking and says, I compiled everything he said about smoking and I'm going to read it. It's like, there's some things in between, but I just wanted to keep all the stuff about smoking together. So this is the Tablet of Purity that Hussein Ruhi Effendi started reading to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. Among these latter is smoking tobacco, which is dirty, smelly, offensive, an evil habit, and one of the harmfulness of which hath gradually become apparent to all. My meaning is that in the sight of God, smoking tobacco is deprecated, abhorrent, filthy in the extreme, and albeit by degrees, highly injurious to health. It is also a waste of money and time, and maketh the user a prey to a nauseous addiction. On receipt of this missive, the friends were surely, by whatever means and over a period of time, forsake this pernicious habit. Such is my hope. Hussein Ruhi Effendi never even managed to finish reading the tablet when Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl took his cigar case and threw it out into the street and said that this was the end of smoking for him, but that he knew the cost. He told Hussein Ruhi Effendi, he said, "Oh, Ruhi Effendi, I have been smoking for 55 years and I am addicted to it. And soon you will see that because of the effect of nicotine, a member of my body will become paralyzed." Not long after he quit smoking, one of Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's arms became paralyzed. And the doctors encouraged him to take up smoking again and would undo the paralysis. But he refused. And he said, I would prefer to die than to disobey Abdu'l-Bahá. The paralysis lasted about 2 years and it went away on its own. Abdu'l-Bahá loved and prized Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl so highly that in 1912, while he was traveling in the United States, he heard Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl had fallen ill. He was going to die 2 years later. So he fell ill in 1912, and Abdu'l-Bahá immediately sent a cable to Cairo and said, "See to the comfort of Abu'l-Faḍl. He consists of my own self." The fact that they were both born in 1844 and the fact that they loved each other with a love that we'll never understand, it almost makes me feel like he was the true brother, twin brother. Of course not, kind of like Mirza Musa was to Bahá'u'lláh. Abdu'l-Bahá never had that. He never had a true brother like Mirza Musa. Mirza Musa was Baha'u'llah's true brother until the very end, until 6 years before Baha'u'llah's death. He was at Baha'u'llah's side every single moment, shared his imprisonments. Abdu'l-Bahá never had that closeness. The only person I've ever found him to be this possessive of is Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, which is another thing that's in Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's life, is how much Abdu'l-Bahá loved him with cables and letters and instructions. A 10-month visit, that's almost an entire year. And always calling him, telling him to write books, telling him it's time to come back to the Middle East. I mean, the relationship is incredibly intimate. Of course, I'm so sorry. Abdu'l-Bahá had the greatest holy leaf his whole life, of course. But he never had faithful brothers, except for Mirza. Never mind, I'm wrong. Oh gosh, I wish we could edit the live stream. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was in Egypt when Abdu'l-Bahá stayed in Alexandria in 1910, in 1911, in 1912, in 1913. Abdu'l-Bahá procured a place to stay for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl from Cairo to Alexandria so that he could live near Abdu'l-Bahá while he was in Alexandria. When American ladies came to Alexandria on pilgrimage, and they knew Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl from the US, and so they wanted to see him. So there are these American ladies with their big hats and their big dresses, and they came to Alexandria all together like a little troop, and they went to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's house, and he was constantly being disrupted in his research and writing schedule. So the ladies would stand on the portico of the house and they'd say, "Oh, Abu'l-Faḍl, oh, Abu'l-Faḍl." And from the entrance, they were standing and they heard from inside the house this elderly voice reply, "Abu'l-Faḍl is not here." I wish, and he said it in English, I wish I could be a fly on the wall for that scene. I would love to hear his voice say that. It's so amazing. So in the autumn of 1913, when Abdu'l-Bahá returned to winter in Egypt, he settled in Ramleh, as usual, the suburb of Alexandria, where he always stayed. And he immediately arranged for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl to come. He rented him a place, a 2-story house in a garden of date palms. And Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl settled into that 2-story house alone. So at first, Abdu'l-Bahá hired a cook to act as Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's personal caretaker. But Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl did not want anyone. He didn't want somebody, he didn't want a maid, he didn't want a cook, he didn't want a gardener, he wanted to be alone in that house. He was essentially a hermit. He loved his hours of solitude, quiet and contemplation. And he was not used to having someone hover around him all the time, all day long. So, and I think I remember reading this right, that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's attitude, he was like, well, Abdu'l-Bahá got me someone to look after me all day long. I can't refuse because it's Abdu'l-Bahá. I will do whatever he wants. But he rebelled in the cutest possible way. He started waiting hand and foot on that servant, serving him tea, like he was an honored guest. And when Abdu'l-Bahá came one day and he saw that, he realized, oh, this is more work for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So he thanked the gentleman, and Abdu'l-Faḍl was all alone in his house again, which is exactly what he wanted. I found you a 2-story house in Alexandria. This is not the one, but I love it. I think it's great. It's deserving enough for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So one of the things Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl loved to do was to walk to the house of Abdu'l-Bahā's secretaries that was around the block from his own house. And he would sit on the veranda, which was quite large. And when he arrived, news traveled. Oh, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl is here. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl is here. Oh, so all these little group would gather and he would deepen them. And on Friday afternoons, the Egyptian students from Alexandria traveled to Ramleh by tram, and they would take a class on the sacred books from Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. Everyone fell in love with him. Like I said before, he had his own very special type of personal charm. Now, he was really an intellectual through and through, but he was never what you would call nerdy or bookish. He had one of those rare minds that was so curious, like a sponge. It absorbed and instantly understood everything around him. He could explore all the different channels of life, and he radiated that dignity and impressiveness when he was discussing a verse of the Quran that he was discussing with learned sheikhs from Alexandria, or when he was talking to American pilgrims. He always had that dignity, always had that respect. He always ended his conversations with pleasantries, always wanted to make people instantly at ease. He was never in a hurry, ever. He always made the time to make wherever he was, a really radiantly happy place. But as soon as he entered the presence of Abdu'l-Bahá, all of that fell away. His personal charm was, like a volume knob. As soon as Abdu'l-Bahá arrived, all of that charm and that kindness and that entertaining and telling jokes and making people comfortable and deepening them, speaking, he just turned the volume down instantly and adopted this incredibly humble attitude. One day in the autumn of 1913, during this visit, Abdu'l-Bahá spoke of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl and said, such men as Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl already belong to the divine concourse. All his interests are centered on the spiritual horizon rather than on his transitory needs. All his efforts are turned towards the heavenly kingdom. He has no other thought. Such souls are aided by heavenly confirmations. So, part 12 now, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's legacy. This is the close-up of the picture of Greenacre because I really loved his half-closed eyes. Just beautiful, I thought. And you can really see the different colors in his beard. Just such a wonderful picture. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl had this, he just had such an incredible character, but his intellect is his legacy. He developed concepts that we still use today, that are still important in the presentation of the faith today. One of his influential and really extraordinary ideas is that even religions that appear to consist of idol worship and are considered heathen, like African traditional religions or Native American religions or Inca religions or, ancient Asian religions, those are all actually originally true religions from God. And that concept is huge, that he would come up with that is just huge. He had posited actually that the original teachings for these religions have been lost over many ages, and now all we have are the rituals, but they were actually very, very original. And so this is huge implications for places like where I live in Central Africa, where African traditional religion is still practiced. He also had a really very keen understanding of contemporary currents of culture and thought. And that was really remarkable for a man who basically only spoke and wrote Persian and Arabic. He knew the latest current trends in philosophy and religion and discussion and rhetoric. So he always found a very comfortable and elegant way to combine the best advantages of traditional knowledge and open, critical, and questioning mind, which was this young mind of him, open, critical, questioning, from his whole life, all the way to the moment that he dies. He had that. He never lost that sharp mind. he presented the Baha'i faith in proofs, and for those of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian background, they provided specific examples of relevant Islamic traditions, references to the Old and the New Testament. And he was in his own self, he was like the Office of External Affairs of the entire Baha'i world. He's the very first defender of the faith. And we're going to look at that in detail right now with Adib. So Adib is going to participate in this. It's awesome. He's going to read the names of the books, and I'm going to tell you what they are. So we're going to start looking at the works of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. He wrote on a variety of subjects in both Arabic and Persian, and his style was elegant and compelling in both languages. We're going to start with the books, and Adib is going to read the titles and the date, and I'm going to tell you what they're about in a few words.
Sure. And just a quick caveat. Some of these works were written in Persian, others in Arabic. But just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to read them all according to the Persian pronunciation.
Do you want to tell people if they were written in Persian and Arabic after you read the title?
Sure. To the best of my memory, I haven't read all of these works, but as far as I know, sure. I'll try.
I think it's great. I think it's a nice touch.
Sure. I like that. Agreed. Yeah. So this first one is the Risale Ayyubiyeh, or the treatise addressed to Ayyub. And it was written in Persian, if I remember correctly.
Okay. So this is from 1887, and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl composed this treatise in Hamadan as a response to questions from a Jewish Baha'i from Tehran who had written him in Hamadan. He asked him questions about the Torah and prophecies of the coming of the Promised One. And this was huge in the entrance of Jewish Baha'is in the faith after his passage to Hamadan.
That last word can also be written or pronounced as mu'arrakhe. They're both correct. In explanation of sacred verses that prophesy dates. I believe this was also written in Persian.
Okay, so in 1888, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl wrote this in Hamadan still on the prophecies in the scriptures of Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism about the date of the coming of the Promised One.
Faslul Khitab. This was written in Persian, the decisive utterance.
So in 1892, the year that Bahá'u'lláh died, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl wrote this very large book in Samarkand, in Uzbekistan. And one of the subjects it dealt with was the Shia traditions about the Promised One. It was republished recently in 1995.
The Fara'id, or the Peerless Gems. This was written primarily in Persian.
Okay, so in 1898, while he was in Cairo, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl composed his greatest scholarly achievement, his masterpiece, called The Peerless Gems. And it was composed in about 6 months. And it is actually a direct response to an attack on the Kitab-e-Iqan, and it sparked 7 or 8 rebuttals from Iranian ulama. We're starting to see now, from prophecy, we're starting to see defense of the faith now.
Durarul Bahiyeh, which literally means the shining pearls, but which has been translated into English as miracles and metaphors. This book was written in Arabic.
Okay, so in 1900, while he was in Arabic, this is the first Arabic book that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl writes, and it's a collection of essays on the history of religion and proofs for the prophethood of Muhammad from the Christian and Jewish scriptures, explanation of Quranic verses, and this is the book that made him publicly known as a Baha'i in Egypt.
Hujajul Bahiyeh, or the Baha'i Proofs. It was translated by Ali Ghuli Khan under that title. This book was also written in Arabic.
So this is the book that Abdu'l-Bahá asked him to write in the United States, the Baha'i Proofs. So he wrote it in 1902, in the middle of his stay around then. And he gives a defense and an exposition. You see, it's also defense of the Baha'i faith from the Christian point of view. And for many, many years, until the publication of Mr. Eslamont's Baha'u'lláh in the New Era, the Baha'i Proofs was the standard Baha'i textbook in America. And you can find it online.
Burhan al-Lami', which means the brilliant proof. This was written in Persian.
Okay, so we're going to hear a lot more about this book because this is the book I chose to show you his argumentation. This is actually a pamphlet he wrote in defense of the faith in 1912 in Beirut, Lebanon, in reply to an article attacking the faith by a Christian clergyman. We're going to look at this in the next section. It was written 2 years before he passed away. And actually, it was written while Abdu'l-Bahá was in London. This clergyman attacked Abdu'l-Bahá while he was in London, and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl defended him from Beirut. It's really interesting. This is the last book.
Kashful Ghita, which means the uncovering of error. And this was also written primarily in Persian.
Mm-hmm. So this work is a refutation of Edward Granville Brown's publication of the Nuqtul Kaf, which contained a lot of material hostile to the Baha'i faith. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl never finished the book, but this is also a defense. So I just want to go back very quickly and show you where it switches from prophecy to defense. This is all Baha'u'lláh is still alive. Prophecy, prophecy, prophecy. And now Baha'u'lláh dies. So 1898 is the last time he really writes about prophecy. And then it's defense, 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 defense. So now we're going to look at just 5 treatises. There are 2 compilations that Mujan Momin lists that have 16 and 23 treatises by Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, so a total of 39. He only talks about 5 of them. So I'm just going to show you 5 of the smaller treatises that he wrote.
Al-Bab wal-Babiyya, which means the Bab and Babism, and this is in Arabic.
So the reason it's in Arabic is because this is actually a brief account of the history of the Baha'i faith that Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl wrote at the request of an Egyptian magazine editor after the assassination of Nasruddin Shah in 1896. And it was the first defense of the Baha'i religion to ever appear in Middle Eastern press.
Risalat Tarablusiyya, or Tarablusiyya, which means Tripoli. This is the letter to Tripoli, and it was written in Arabic.
Yeah, so after the Bab and Babiism was published in the Egyptian journal, some people in Tripoli, in Libya, had questions, so they wrote questions, and this treatise is a response to their questions.
2 treatises on the covenant. These were both written in Persian.
Okay, so these treatises, they actually are also about the defense of the faith because they deal with the actions of the covenant breakers and bring forward proofs from the Bible and the Quran for the covenant and the station of Abdu'l-Bahá. So this is like detailed, pointed defense of the covenant, not just the faith.
Risale Iskandariye, or the treatise of or for Alexander, named after the man for whom it was written, Alexander Tumansky. This was written in Persian.
Mm-hmm. So actually, it's interesting, Adib, because I think that this treaty was written in Samarkand, in Uzbekistan, and it was a direct reply to a request by Edward Granville Brown for a history of the life of Baha'u'lláh. But instead of calling it the treatise to Edward Granville Brown, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl called it the treatise for Alexander Tumansky, who was a Russian Orientalist who loved Baha'u'lláh very much. He published Baha'u'llah's Will and Testament in a Russian Orientalist journal. So I just think it's very interesting that it was written as a request from someone, but he gave it the name of this other person. I just think that's really interesting. It says a lot about Edward Granville Brown, actually, more than anything. Adib, thank you so much for this. This was fun. I love this. So this is just, now, friends, I want to just ask you, would you like me to continue? I have about 10 more minutes left. I know we're close to the end, but I want to show you the example of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, Defense of the Faith. And then there's his passing, and just a 1 sentence as a final epilogue. Do you want me to finish these 3 things, or am I going to look at the chat? If you would
do that, that would be great, Violetta.
Okay, great. All right, fine. So when I was preparing for this second part of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's life, my mom said, you cannot present this to the friends and not actually show them how brilliant Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was. She said, do you have an example? I said, no. She's like, well, do you have the books that he wrote? And I said, yes. She says, well, read them all and find the best example of the working of his mind and then share that with the friends, because everybody always says Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl is brilliant, but nobody ever says why. And I said, that is actually an excellent point. So I chose for this part of the talk, the brilliant proof this is, okay, so what happened was Abdu'l-Bahá was in England, and one of he was invited to speak at St. John's Church, and then the Christian leader who was there allowed him to sit in the bishop's chair on the 17th of September, 1911. And Peter Z. Easton, who was a Presbyterian minister to missionary to Iran, was incensed the fact they allowed someone who's not Christian to sit on that chair. He wrote an article called Baha'ism, a Warning, attacking the faith. And it was published in the September-October 1911 issue of a magazine called Evangelical Christendom. So by December of 1911, the article made its way to Beirut, where Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was sick in bed in his hotel room. And Habib Muayyad approached him and informed him of the article. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl immediately rose out of his bed and dictated for 2 hours a response. And he said, come back the next day and we'll finish. But when Habib Muayyad came back the next day, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl had probably spent the whole night responding to a rebuttal that is 30 pages long. And he said to Habib Muayyad, I have written the answer to Peter Z. Easton. It is ready. Mail this to Abdu'l-Bahá so he can, in his wisdom, decide what to do with it. The manuscript, written in 2 days, was mailed to Abdu'l-Bahá in America. Abdu'l-Bahá approved the manuscript, ordered it should be published immediately, praised the eloquence in the essay and Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's unassailable arguments, and gave it its distinctive title, The Brilliant Proof. That is Abdu'l-Bahá giving the book its own title. In this treatise, we're going to find Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's thought at its clearest, because he's 2 years away from his passing. And he's got his entire life's work of practicing this logical argumentation. Nowhere is it clearer than in The Brilliant Proof. That's why people do not understand aging, because in the life of Bahá'u'lláh, in the life of Abdu'l-Bahá, like in the life of many of the hands of the cause, in the life of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, their spiritual gifts and their intellectual gifts only got better until the point they died. So when they were at their oldest, they were also at their best, intellectually speaking and spiritually speaking. And this is exactly, see, a lot of Abdu'l-Bahā's most wonderful, amazing tablets, like the tablet to the Hague, the tablet to the tablets of the Divine Plan, the tablet to Auguste Forel, and Baha'u'llah's, all his most famous tablets, they were all written when they were in their 60s. This is the brilliant proof. This is the emanation of a brilliant mind that has 60 years to perfect itself. And so I'm only going to read, I'm going to do 2 things with this. I'm going to show you in Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's own words how he breaks down the attack on the faith by the article. He weeds out 4 attacks, and his rebuttal is numbered: 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. For each of them, he has a whole different technique, and each of the 4 is a different technique of argumentation. But I'm going to show you how he argues the first point, and then I'm going to show you how he argues the first, so anyway, we're going to see 3 things. So this is how the brilliant proof begins. This is Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl's words. First, hold on, I missed something. So this is how the brilliant proof begins. He is the living, the self-subsistent. In these days, which are the latter days of 1911 and the early days of 1330 AH, I have seen a curious article which astonished me. What did I see? I find that one of the missionaries of the Protestant sect, who accounts himself among the learned men of the 20th century, a helper of pure religion of Christ, and one of the civilized and cultured Occidentals, by the name Peter Z. Easton, has been so provoked by jealousy at the universal spread of the heavenly word of His Holiness Abdu'l-Bahá throughout the vast expanse of Europe, that he has trespassed the limit of courtesy and humanity and published an article replete with execration and calumny in the magazine Evangelical Christendom. See how precise he is. He cites the magazine. He even talks to the reader. What did I see? Briefly, as this servant carefully perused and weighed the above-mentioned article, it was found that Peter Z. Easton, in his own supposition, has clung to 4 proofs in opposing the great Baha'i cause. We will therefore, like he says, we will therefore mention 4 points clearly and clearly show the falsity of his fanciful ideas in each instant. So he lays out his plan for the treatise, and then he's going to take the attacks one by one. See how organized he is in his introduction? So that's what he does. This is actually his own words. First, words of writers who, in his opinion, have made accusations against Baha'u'lláh, attributing objectionable qualities to him. Second, the declaration that the teachings of Baha'u'lláh are pantheistic and that pantheism is a false doctrine. Third, the statement that the intention of the Baha'i religion is to reestablish despotic government, while despotism is the practice of tyrannical and forsaken governments. And four, that the Baha'i religion is not able to show anything better or superior to other religions. In a word, what new things has Baha'u'lláh brought which are not found in Christian religion? And what is the need for distinction? Then he says, now therefore it is necessary for us to write an answer to these assertions made under the forementioned points so that we may distinguish truth from falsehood and guidance from error. So what Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl does next is he addresses each of Reverend Easton's 4 attacks one by one, and he carefully deconstructs them, dismantles them, and dismisses them. And this book is available online. It's called The Brilliant Proof. So now I'm going to just zone in. I'm going to show you what he does with the first argument of the 4th point. So the 4th point, it's really a work of art to see how perfectly clear his mind is working. He takes the 4 point, basically, Baha'u'llah's teachings are nothing new. And what he does is he constructs a carefully crafted, well-informed, unassailable rebuttal by expounding at length on 9 new teachings brought by Baha'u'lláh that had previously not existed in the sacred scriptures of any religion. So these are in the pamphlet. I'm not going to go over them. I just want to show you the very first argument that he makes is that what Baha'u'lláh has brought is a freedom from oral tradition. Okay, so first, a command which is particularly a feature in the Baha'i religion and is not found in the other religions is abstaining from crediting verbal traditions. And now look at how he develops this. He has 3 main points. 1, he goes into Judaism. 2, Christianity. 3, Islam. And he shows how oral tradition has ruined those religions. And his 4th point is that's not going to happen in the Baha'i faith. It is well known to men of learning that it was verbal tradition which divided the Jews into 2 great sects. Such traditions are the basis of the book of Talmud and has caused the division of that one great nation. One of the 2 schisms called the rabbinism looks upon the teachings of the Talmud as the law which needs to be followed and considers it the greatest means for the preservation and permanence of the Jewish people. But the other sect, Gharaim, looks at the Talmud as sheer heresy and conducive to perdition. Thus, these 2 sects cannot possibly be harmonized or cease mutual opposition. So he proves that Judaism has suffered from oral tradition. 2, similarly, in the Christian tradition, the main cause of schism and division were these verbal traditions, which were termed authoritative. Each one of the Christian churches, such as the Catholic, the Orthodox, the Jacobite, the Nestorian, and others, consider it obligatory to follow these traditions inherited from and handed down by the fathers of their churches as the very text of the Holy Book. Thus, when any of the great councils come together, the question of whether the unification of the Christian people into one would be an issue, they would all avail themselves of these inherited traditions which were opposed to union and harmony. So it's destroyed the Christian church. Now Islam, likewise in the religion of Islam, claiming that these verbal traditions which were related to the founder of that religion subsequent to his death was the cause of division and separation into the various principal sects, such as Sunni, Shiite, Kharajite, or in the secondary schools of Hanafite, Malakite, Shafi'ite, Hawbilite, etc. Each of these hold a set of tradition considered as authentic by their own sects. But Baha'u'lláh closed to the people of the world this door, which is the greatest means for sedition. He has clearly announced that in the religion of God, all recorded matters are referable to the book, and all unrecorded matters are dependent upon the decision of the House of Justice. Thus, all narrations, relations, and verbal traditions have been discredited among the Baha'i people and the door of dissension, which is the greatest among all the doors of hell, has been closed and locked. You see how he moves through each religion and then makes his point finally that's just like, you can't say anything. He's quoting Bahá'u'lláh. He's actually quoting Bahá'u'lláh, saying something new in a reference to Peter Easton, who said, what has Bahá'u'lláh said that's new? You can't argue with someone like that. All right. My least favorite section. Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's passing. Towards the end of 1912, Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl, who had always been essentially very solitary, he'd gone very frail and in health, but he kept busy with his research and writing until the end of his life, his last breath, and he produced numerous treatises on the history of the Baha'i faith, the Covenant of Baha'u'lláh, proofs and prophecies of the Quran and the Bible. In January, you know what's nice is that even though he was sick and ill, he would still take care of the people who came to visit him and prepare tea for them himself. I mean, even until the very moment when he was had to lie down, until that point, he was still serving his guests. So in January 19th, which is 1914, which is the coldest month in Cairo, his strength fell very rapidly and he found himself confined to bed very suddenly. He was transferred to the house of Agha Muhammad Taqi from Isfahan, and he was attended to by the best doctors and nurses in Cairo. He never recovered. And on the 21st of January, 1914, at 4 p.m, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl died of endocarditis at the age of 70. The nurse in attendance said that his last words were Khoda, Khoda, God, God. Words of maybe farewell to this world and greetings to the next world. He was carried on the shoulders of Baha'is of Egypt from the house of Agha Muhammad Taqi to the cemetery on the hill, and he was laid to rest in a mausoleum. The tomb was a large underground room in the center of which his remains were laid. Fragrant narcissus were scattered on his resting place, and the tearful believers chanted tablets. This is a picture of him in the obituary from Star of the West. After the funeral, according to the Muslim custom, a large tent was raised in front of Agha Muhammad Taqi's home for the wake in memory of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, and people gathered there throughout the night to listen to verses of the Quran being chanted by sheikhs. Same thing happened after Baha'u'lláh died. The telegram from Cairo informing Abdu'l-Bahá of Mírzá Abu'l-Fadl's passing arrived late in the night of 21 January 1914. The next day at lunch on the 22nd of January, Abdu'l-Bahá opened the cable and read it as he was sitting down to have his lunch. He didn't say a word. He rose from his seat without eating, and he went to his room where he stayed alone until the end of the afternoon. Then he left his house and went to Mirza Hadi straight to the telegraph office and sent a message of consolation to the friends in Cairo. And then he sent a cable announcing the passing of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl to the Baha'i world, which was published in Star of the West in the memorial issue for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl in volume 4, number 19. The death of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. The eyes have shed tears and the hearts have burned because of this great affliction. Be possessed with the beauty of patience in this mighty calamity. That evening, after all the believers gathered in Abdu'l-Bahā's home, at first Abdu'l-Bahá was silent. And then he started to speak with his eyes closed. He would just speak a few sentences and then a flood of emotion would sweep over him and he'd just pause before resuming. His address that evening was extremely long, but I'm just going to quote you one paragraph. Today, a most painful news was received. Its effect was agonizing, and its anguish very harrowing. Truly, I say, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was a glorious personage. From every standpoint, he was peerless. It is a rare thing to find a person perfect from every direction, but he was such a person. Truly, I say he was in a state of the utmost severance, adorned with the highest virtue, firmness, and steadfastness. He was absolutely detached from everything. Abdu'l-Bahá gave 3, 4, 5 eulogies for Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. I'm not joking, 5. I'm just going to read you just a little bit about the next one, 2 days after the passing. The calamitous death of His Holiness Abu'l-Faḍl is of such vast proportion that no matter how I strive to console myself, I do not succeed. How good it is that man during his existence may conduct himself in such a manner that when he passes away, the hearts of the believers will be attracted toward him so as to cherish his memory forever and ever. And we together today are living proof of Abdu'l-Bahā's words. We're cherishing Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl together. This is the most touching thing. This is the door next to the shrine of the Bab. And Abdu'l-Bahá named it Bab-i-Faḍl, the door of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. And by, I don't know, by design, by coincidence, when Abdu'l-Bahá passed away, he was buried in the vault beneath the room that is in front of that is behind that door. Bab-i-Faḍl, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl has guarded the believers who've entered the shrine of Abdu'l-Bahá for 100 years. So I want to just finish my talk with this. It's very, very short. It's just about the monument of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. A little more than a year after Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl died, Lua Getzinger arrived in Cairo. So she arrived in mid-September 1915, and she died 8 months later at the age of 43 from sudden heart failure on the 2nd of May, 1916, and she was buried next to Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. So beginning in 1919, the National Assembly of Egypt had always planned to build a suitable monument for the two of them. 20 years later, Shoghi Effendi asked for the fund that they had opened for this purpose to be reignited, and he made plans to proceed with the building of a memorial site. This drawing for a plan of the memorial site was drawn by my own grandfather, Fawzi Zain al-Abidin, and he was born in Cairo, Egypt. He was a respected art teacher. He was an inspector of the technical art school in Egypt, and his design for the shrine of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl and Lua Getzinger was accepted by the Guardian. It was designed as a pillar supporting a globe, and at its base, an open book. And from a distance, it's similar in design to the resting place of Shoghi Effendi, which was designed later, much later, except the resting place of Shoghi Effendi has an eagle on the globe. So things moved along. The first thing that happened was that Lua Getzinger, Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl and Lua Getzinger were reinterred. Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl was sometime between 1944 and 1946. They were reinterred in 2 adjoining tombs. So the tomb of Lua Getzinger faced west, and the tomb of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl faced east, and that was in the cemetery in Cairo. And now, and this is our last slide for today, this is the monument in the past and today, and I want to thank Dr. Bijan Masoumian, my friend Gamal Hassan, and my family member Hoda El Sayed for sharing the 3 beautiful recent photographs of the monument that you see, and that sort of give life to the picture. And I want to thank you all so much for sticking with me. I know I went over my time. So sorry about that. But yeah.
Violetta, we appreciate your time, and we thank you for actually making the time to finish this part 2. And we look forward to your next presentations in the coming months. Sean, do you have any last things before you want to close out the session?
No, nothing. Just asking everyone who's seen this video to please share. It's very important Baha'i history, and as you know, it's important to remember those who passed before us on this path that we are now embarking on this path of service. So you have a shining example in Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl, and you also have, more than anything, a shining example in the people present who are taking the time, putting in the effort to share this story. So we thank all of you, people who have shared this story today, as well as, more importantly, the shining example of Mírzá Abu'l-Faḍl. And we again recommend, check it out on clearwaterbahais.org, www.theutterance. I'm sorry, I'm just can you close that one, Violetta?
I'm sorry?
Violetta.
The website.
Can I chant a prayer?
Sorry, what? I'm sorry.
Can I chant a prayer?
Closed?
Yes. Hello, Bahin. Yes, you can. You can chant a prayer. Just
yes,
let me.
Bahin, please chant a prayer.
Just let me say the website really quick. The website is www.theutteranceproject.com.
Yes.
Theutteranceproject.com.
I love it.
Everyone's welcome to check it out.
So beautiful. I bring my prayer book and I chant.
And while Bahin is bringing her prayer book, we welcome you to also look at the YouTube channel for the Utterance Project, and you'll see again the works that you've now seen. Violetta's works now, collaborations between Violetta and that Dib. It's phenomenal. We recommend you to check it out. You'll see some of the beautiful pieces Violetta put together about Bahá'u'lláh, the Bab, and Abdu'l-Bahá, which are 3 illustrated chronologies. And again, there's more work coming, so stay tuned as we have another story of Violetta that we will share in the future, and as well, the stories that are shared on the utteranceproject.com as well. So with that being said, we're ready, I think, for our closing prayer. And Jeremiah, after the closing prayer, you can just close the video. We don't need to close out again.
Okay. This is prayers from Abdu'l-Bahá. ای بنده پرمفای جمال خودم، زنده باسم زمین، رنجور بلا رو دیگر چه غمی، من با جهت‌ها هر یک شویمی، دریای جفا شبنمی، دیگر چه غمی، هجوم اعدا تاریک شبی، تایید ملکوت ابها، جلوه صبح دمی، دیگر چه غمی، شماتت جهان چون تنین مگسی، و ندای ملیالا بانگ فریاد رسی، دیگر چه غمی، مقاومت علما چون استقامت پشه بینوا، قوت کلمت الله چون ریح سرسر شدید القوا، دیگر چه غمی، سوسی ناگزین چون حرکت مور بی وفا سلطنت میثاق ستوت میثاق سلطنت سماوات علا دیگر چه غمی بنیان امم بنیاد بر هوا اساس امرالله قصر مشید ضربه علیا دیگر چه غمی والبها فلک